Get down. Get with her. Get with her. Jenae whooped this whole ass.
Get that whole ass. Y'all get out the car.
No, she finna pull off in her car. She finna pull off in her car. No! They just took that girl car! Man, what was she in your car for? What the f wrong with this? Oh, this trying to speed off in the car. This trying to speed off in the car.
This isn't a movie sound effect. This is real audio, recorded live by the people who were actually standing in the middle of it. Before you hear another word from me, I want you to understand exactly what you're dealing with here. This isn't a case built on secondhand rumors or a single 911 call. This is a case where almost the entire chain of events, from the first insult to the final gunshot, was captured on camera by the people involved and broadcast live for strangers on the internet to watch in real time. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how a Tuesday night in Birmingham, Alabama turned into something witnesses compared to a war zone. You're going to know why over 168 bullets tore through one apartment complex in under 4 minutes. And you're going to understand why, almost 2 years later, this case still hasn't reached its final chapter in court. Here's Promise 1. You're going to hear the actual live stream audio, in her friend's own words, in the minutes before a single shot was fired. Not a paraphrase, not a summary. The real thing, as it happened. Here's Promise 2. You're going to learn exactly what happened in the 3 minutes that followed the first shot, minute by minute, and why 5 different people are now facing murder charges because of it.
Poole, a 17-year-old, is now facing a murder charge in connection to that shooting on Gallant Drive last week. A judge will determine if he'll be tried as an adult.
It was supposed to be an ordinary night. The 20th of August, 2024. Just before 10:30 p.m. Nothing about Monarch Ridge Apartments looked any different from 100 other Tuesday nights before it. No sirens, no warning signs, just people coming and going the way they always did. Then the gunfire started, and it didn't stop. Neighbors who lived there for years said they'd never heard anything like it. One described it as sounding exactly like a war zone, not gunfire in the distance, but gunfire surrounding them, coming from what felt like every direction at once. It went on for over 3 minutes. If you've never had to sit through 3 minutes of continuous gunfire, understand that in a moment like that, 3 minutes can feel like an eternity. Somewhere in the middle of all that chaos was a 21-year-old mother named Asia Poole. She had a 4-year-old daughter waiting for her at home. She had, by every account from the people who knew her, a future ahead of her, plans, dreams, a whole life still being written. She never made it back to that daughter. What makes this case different from almost every other one you've seen on this channel or anywhere else is how much of it exists on video. The buildup, the threats, the confrontation itself. Even the immediate aftermath. Nearly all of it was live streamed on Facebook for anyone watching to see in real time as it happened. Think about that for a second. Most true crime cases get pieced together after the fact: witness statements, forensic reports, police reconstructions built weeks or months later. This case didn't need much reconstruction. The people involved built the timeline themselves, on camera, without realizing what they were documenting. If a story like this deserves to be told properly with the actual evidence, not just speculation, hit subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear only gets harder to listen to from here. By the time the shooting finally stopped, Asia Poole was dead. Her best friend was lying on the pavement with a gunshot wound to his leg. And in the days and weeks that followed, 5 separate people would be arrested and charged with her murder. 5 people, 1 shooting. And, as you'll see, a case where almost nobody agrees on who actually fired the shot that killed her. Here's the question that's going to follow you through the rest of this video. How does an argument over a man, the kind of dispute that happens online every single day, Between people who will never meet in person turn into 168 bullets flying through an apartment complex parking lot in under 4 minutes. To answer that question properly, you have to go back. Back before the guns came out, back before the live stream even started recording, back to who Asia Poole actually was, and how a fight that was supposed to be between two women ended up pulling in a crowd big enough to start a small war. Because here's the uncomfortable truth this case forces you to sit with. Nobody who was there that night thought it would end like this. Not Asia, not Jenae. Not even the people who showed up already talking about guns. And that gap between what everyone expected and what actually happened is exactly where this story lives. To understand how a fist fight turned into a firing line, you have to go back to who Asia Poole really was, and how this dispute even started in the first place. Asia Alice Poole was known by nearly everyone who knew her as the fun one, the outgoing one. The person who filled her social media with videos of her friends, her family, and her daughter always smiling, always the center of whatever room she was in. But by every account from people close to her, Asia's real world revolved around one person, her daughter, a little girl who had just turned 4 years old. Friends describe Asia as a devoted mother, someone who built her entire life around making sure that little girl had everything she needed. Just 1 week before the shooting, Asia's world had already been shattered once. The father of her daughter had died. He was only 21 years old, the same age as Asia herself. Reports at the time indicated he passed from natural causes, not violence, not an accident, just a sudden, devastating loss. Asia was grieving. In the days before the shooting, she'd been posting emotional tributes to him online, sharing memories, processing a loss that would have been difficult for anyone to carry, let alone a young single mother. And then, in the middle of that grief, while she was still actively mourning the father of her child, a new conflict started, this time with a woman named Jenae Hendricks. The dispute was over a man, and it began the way so many disputes like this do now, online, in comments, in messages, in an argument that started digital and refused to stay that way. Here's Promise 1, delivered in full. Instead of letting the argument fade the way most online disputes eventually do, Asia and Jenae made a decision that would change everything. They agreed to meet up in person, and they agreed to fight. It's worth pausing here to ask yourself something. How many arguments have you seen online that escalate to exactly this point, two people agreeing to physically settle something that started as a comment thread? It happens more than you'd think. What almost never happens is what came next. Neither Asia nor Jenae could have predicted what their friends were about to turn a simple fight into. One of those friends was a man everyone in the group called Montez. According to those close to Asia, he'd known her for somewhere between 10 and 15 years, practically a lifetime of friendship. On the night of August 20th, he rode in the car with her, live on camera, as they drove straight toward Monarch Ridge Apartments. What Montez said during that car ride would become one of the single most disputed and controversial parts of this entire case. We're going to get to exactly what he said, word for word, later in this video, because it matters. And because you need to hear it in context to understand how the people on both sides of this conflict were thinking in the minutes before everything went wrong. First, though, you need to understand exactly where Asia and her friends were headed that night. Because Monarch Ridge Apartments was not just any apartment complex. Monarch Ridge has a documented history that goes back years. Back in 2021, when the complex was still operating under a different name, Valley Brook Apartments, the city of Birmingham actually filed a lawsuit against the property. That lawsuit specifically cited substantial, ongoing criminal activity and violence at the location, activity serious enough that city officials felt legal action was the only remaining option. The lawsuit was eventually settled, and as part of that settlement, the property agreed to install surveillance cameras. Not just any cameras that were supposed to feed directly into the Birmingham Police Department's real-time crime center, giving officers the ability to monitor the property and respond faster if something went wrong. That direct connection never actually worked the way it was designed to. Not on the 20th of August, 2024, not when it mattered most. Whatever technical or bureaucratic failure kept those cameras from feeding into the police system, the result was the same. When trouble started that night, there was no real-time link giving officers a head start. So when Asia, Montez, and the rest of their group pulled into the Monarch Ridge parking lot around 10 p.m., they weren't simply walking into a personal dispute between two young women. They were walking into a location that city officials had already flagged as dangerous enough to sue over 3 full years earlier. Does that history make what happened next feel inevitable? Or was there still a moment, even that late in the night, where this could have gone a completely different direction? There was one moment, a warning, buried in the middle of that same car ride, easily missed by anyone who hasn't listened closely to the full live stream audio, and a detail that almost every other retelling of this case has skipped over entirely. Somewhere in that chaos, in those first chaotic seconds of gunfire erupting from every direction, Asia Poole was struck multiple times in the back. Think about what that detail tells you. Not facing the gunfire, not caught in a standoff, struck in the back, which strongly suggests she was already trying to get away when the shots found her. If you'd been in that car and heard that warning on the phone, would you have turned around? Be honest with yourself in the comments, because Asia didn't, and it cost her everything. The fight itself was over in seconds. What came after it lasted 3 minutes, and it would never really be over for the people who lived through it. Over 3 minutes. More than 168 rounds. That's the figure investigators believe accurately reflects how much gunfire tore through Monarch Ridge apartments that night. Pistols, rifles, fully automatic weapons, all firing at what witnesses describe as essentially the same time, from multiple directions across the parking lot. People who lived at Monarch Ridge for years, who had heard gunfire before in a neighborhood with its own documented history of violence, said they'd never heard anything close to this. More than one witness compared it, almost word for word, to a war zone. Another told reporters it sounded like World War III. And somewhere in the middle of that gunfire, Asia Poole went down, struck multiple times in the back, in the direction that suggests she was running or trying to run when the shots caught up to her. Bree's phone was still recording when it happened, capturing audio that, by every account of people who've heard it, is almost impossible to listen to without feeling it in your chest. What that recording captured next is the single hardest part of this entire story to sit with. Aisha's brother reached her first. In the audio, you can hear the exact moment he realizes what he's looking at: his sister on the ground, unresponsive, blood pooling beneath her on the pavement. And in that moment, there was nothing he could do to fix it. Nothing anyone could do. Her sister was there too. According to the audio and later accounts, screaming, physically restrained by people around her as she watched her own sibling dying in front of her in a parking lot, surrounded by strangers who'd come to watch a fight. This is exactly the kind of case that deserves to be remembered accurately, not just clicked on and forgotten. If you're still with us at this point, subscribe now, because the story you're about to hear isn't finished yet, not even close. In that same chaotic stretch of audio, you can hear Asia's brother running up a flight of stairs, banging on a stranger's apartment door, begging for car keys. Why, exactly? Nobody involved has said for certain, and neither should we pretend to know. Some people who followed this case closely believe he was trying to get back in a vehicle to go after whoever had done the shooting, a raw, understandable impulse in the immediate aftermath of watching a loved one get shot. Others believe he needed to leave the scene entirely, reportedly out of concern that if police arrived and found him there, his own legal situation could have landed him in custody, unable to even properly mourn his sister. Both explanations have circulated widely since this case went public. Neither one has been confirmed by any official source, and we're not going to pretend otherwise by presenting one as fact. One more detail needs to be handled carefully here, because it remains genuinely unverified. Some reports and secondhand accounts claim that Asia's sister returned fire toward the vehicle Jenae had gotten into. That claim traces back to unnamed sources and hasn't been confirmed through any official charging document or court record that we've been able to find. We're presenting it here exactly as it exists as an allegation.
A fifth person is now charged in the death of Asia Poole. A 17-year-old is now facing a murder charge in connection to that shooting on Gallant Drive last week.
Birmingham Fire and
Rescue. A fifth person is now charged in the death of Asia Poole. A 17-year-old is now facing a murder charge in connection to that shooting on Gallant Drive last week.
She was unresponsive when paramedics
reached her. A fifth person is now charged in the death of Asia Poole. A 17-year-old is now facing a murder charge in connection to that shooting on Gallant Drive last week. A fifth person is now charged in the death of Asia Poole. A 17-year-old is now facing a murder charge in connection to that shooting on Gallant Drive last week.
Who'd been hyping up the confrontation earlier in the night was found with a gunshot wound to his leg. He survived and was treated at UAB Hospital. In the days and weeks that followed, 5 people would be arrested and charged with murder in connection with Asia's death. What do you honestly think that brother was running for retaliation or his own survival? We want to know what you think you'd have done standing in his shoes. But almost 2 years later, the full story of who actually fired the first shot and who bears ultimate legal responsibility for Asia's death is still being argued over in a Birmingham courtroom. The shooting eventually stopped that night. The questions it left behind never did. By daylight the next morning, the damage told its own story without a single word of narration needed. Bullet holes torn through car trunks, windows shattered clean through, rounds that had passed straight through apartment walls into the living spaces where families were sleeping. Reporters who arrived at Monarch Ridge that morning described the scene as staggering, not in the abstract, but literally, walking from car to car and finding new bullet holes on almost every vehicle in the lot. One local news correspondent, standing in that same parking lot, put it about as plainly as it can be put. Witnesses were telling her that hundreds of shots had been fired, and the daylight, the physical, undeniable evidence scattered across the property only confirmed exactly what those witnesses had said. Demarion Rankins, recovering from his own gunshot wound, later spoke to reporters about what this entire case was really about underneath all the chaos. Not gang violence in the way outsiders might assume. Not a robbery gone wrong. A dispute over a man, the kind of conflict that starts in comment sections every single day that became a shared social media feud and then, within days, became a funeral. Here's exactly where this case stands as of today. 5 people have been formally charged with murder in connection with Asia Poole's death. Their individual cases are still working their way through the court system at different stages, with different levels of evidence against each of them. What remains genuinely unresolved, not just unclear to outside observers like us, but unresolved in the eyes of the court itself, is the exact sequence of who fired first and who ultimately bears the greatest legal responsibility for the shot that ended Asia's life. Prosecutors are still actively building that case. A jury has not yet heard the full evidence. Nothing here has reached a final verdict. That matters, because it would be tempting even to wrap this story up with a clean conclusion. The truth is messier than that, and it deserves to be treated that way. Monarch Ridge Apartments still stands today. The bullet-scarred walls that reporters photographed the next morning have since been repaired. On the surface, at least, life at the complex has moved on the way life tends to, even after something unthinkable happens there. But for one family, nothing has moved on in the same way. Asia's 4-year-old daughter is growing up without her mother, without the woman who, by every account from the people who knew her, built her entire world around that little girl. All of it, the online argument, the agreed-upon fight, the live stream, the 168 bullets traces back to a dispute over a man, a relationship that, statistically, most people involved in a similar online argument would have simply walked away from. If an online argument over a relationship can escalate into 168 shots fired and 5 separate murder charges, what does that actually tell you about how quickly things can spiral now? Tell us honestly what you think really happened that night in the comments. We read every single one. This case isn't finished. The courtroom hasn't delivered its final answer, And until it does, the complete truth of exactly what happened at Monarch Ridge Apartments on the night of the 20th of August 2024 is still, technically, being decided. We'll be following this case as it moves through the courts, and when there's a verdict or new evidence or anything that changes what we know here today, we're going to bring it to you. If you want to be here when those verdicts finally come in, subscribe now and turn on notifications
Früher privat blieben und sich vor den Augen aller abspielen, die durch den Feed scrollen. Freunde versuchten beide Frauen zu beruhigen, ohne Erfolg. In der Nacht des 20. August fuhren er sie und eine Gruppe von Freunden in Richtung Monarch Ridge, um Jenae persönlich